Welcome to your 5 petal flower tutorial in a cluster of 3. Today we're going to be using our 5 petal template in a 1 and 2 size and our regular palette knife, as well as a bag of modeling paste. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and trace out our template by making a mark on the top of each petal. Now, I went ahead and printed mine out on a piece of card, like card paper, cardstock. There you go. This one is on a lighter piece of paper. You can see the cardstock just holds up a little bit better. So I recommend that, but obviously a plain piece of paper works as well. Now I am choosing 2 smaller ones with 1 bigger one so that I can use the rule of 3s here. So there is a rule of odds that helps us kind of guide how many either flowers or entities we include in a picture. It just helps out with the visualization or the kind of the bringing together of the painting. Now from here, I am drawing lines in towards the center of each one of my flowers. I do this so that I know which way the petal needs to lie. When you have a whole bunch of dots and you did it about 5 minutes ago, believe me, the dots just start to look like dots and you forget which way to lay your petal. So go ahead and draw those lines on in. Now we're going to go ahead and pipe out a good amount of texture and grab a bit of that with our palette knife. I am using just what I call the everyday palette knife. Just this came in a packet of 2s and I use it for everything. Now I got lucky here and I have clean sides on both sides with just 2 rolls. Part of that is because it's a clean palette. The other part is the way that I laid my piping. And then thirdly is just practice. I went ahead and decided I needed a bit more texture on my palette knife, so I grabbed some more. I am checking for the sides and I can see that there are 2 little peaks here that will show up on my petal. So I am just going to clean up those edges using my finger. Now, when I go to lay my petal, I'm going to come in at about a 45-degree angle and then pull back. So I am kind of measuring where I want the end of that palette to be. So you can see I'm kind of measuring up right there. So at the end of where the texture is where the end of that canvas is lying. I'm going to come in at a 45-degree angle, press down, and then pull out. Now I am going to show you all of my petals and how I roll them. That way you can see it throughout the process. I've found loading the palette knife and rolling it back and forth the hardest part of the learning process. I also found that using these piping bags helped clean up my palette because what I struggled with most was having a clean palette to create that clean edge. The cleaner your palette is, the easier it will be to roll your palette knife. So you can see here I am slowly laying each one of my petals. Now these are all a little bit of different sizes, and that's because I'm just kind of grabbing the texture at any width. If I wanted to create all even petals, I would just be a little bit more diligent about how much I was loading and making sure that I was loading a similar amount and a similar width on each one of my petals. Now I'm going to go in and start my smaller petal or my smaller flower, but I'm noticing that my palette knife has texture all the way down the palette knife itself. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a paper towel and clean off my palette knife. I keep a paper towel close by, and it just slowly builds this beautiful different colors of texture. So just have a roll of paper towels nearby. Should add that to the list of supplies that y'all need. Now from here, I am only loading my palette knife a halfway. So you can see that it's only halfway down the palette knife. This is going to create a smaller petal. That edge right there is not going to come out on my petal because I'm going to smush it down, so I'm not worrying about that at all. Now I'm realizing that I'm not going to be able to pull back without smushing the other flower, so I'm going to lay this petal inwards. Now you can see the peak goes in towards the center on this smaller one, whereas with the bigger ones, the peak is towards the end. I can just assure you that this is something that would have drove me nuts as a beginner, but you will not notice at all once all of our flowers are laid, the centers are in, and the leaves are done. So don't worry about it too much. Now, I'm going to preemptively tell you, because I have now filmed this audio of the video 4 times, that I make a mistake here and I press this one towards the out. Now, this is something that I probably would have been torn up against had this been one of my first few pieces. But this is something that will not see at all. I would recommend obviously trying to keep all of the petals going the same direction within the same flower. But if you do make a mistake just because you're not thinking, this is not the end of the world. Now, I am going to get a little bit quiet here, and I'm going to let the remainder of the leaves just let you watch each one of them be rolled onto the palette knife as well as laid. And if there is something that I want to chime in on, I will do that. For example, this leaf you can see kind of got smushed to the left. Again, we're not going to worry too much about that. We are going to clean up all of these kind of like little bobos when we lay the center, and you won't even be able to see it. So here I am going to get quiet and let you watch the roll. If you notice, I keep saying I'm going to get quiet and they keep talking. I do want you to notice that when I am laying the petal, or when I am loading the palette knife, that I am rubbing it down in this kind of way that grabs the texture and rolls it under. So this rolling of under is what helps make it smooth on either side. And so just as much as you can get that motion down, the better. Now I'm noticing that I have too much texture on this palette knife, so I'm going to go grab another palette knife and get this corrected. So I'm going to take another palette knife and I'm just going to cut it literally off, and that way I still have this nice smaller flower, but I don't have to go back and re-roll the petal itself. The next step in our process is going to be laying the center. So I have a small bag of light yellow texture that I've cut just a very small tip on, and I'm going to go in and just lay little dots in a circular pattern. Now, one thing that I have learned is that it looks better aesthetically if I keep my circle completely circle. That is, I don't follow the pattern of the center of the flower that is there. Instead, I'm going to pipe a circle, even if that means that some of the texture from the petal is going to peek through the center of the circle. When we think about textured flowers, this is very much an abstract-ish art form in that it looks best far away. And so I found that having a circular circle, or not an oval per se, just looks better from my eyes aesthetic point of view. Next up, we are going to clean our palette, our paper palette, and get ready to lay our green leaves. I'm going to pinch off my piping bag. This is going to seal it up for storage, and I'm just going to bring that down so that I can place it in my storage box. Then I'm going to grab a wet paper towel and clean my palette knife or palette paper. My biggest recommendation is to clean your palette paper in between not only every color, but really every flower set. This is going to help keep your palette clean, and the best way to ensure you're getting smooth flowers is a clean, smooth palette. Now I have a bunch of greens and I'm going to just kind of look to see what green looks best against the flower color itself as well as the background. I went ahead and decided on this blue or bright green. That way it brings some, some brightness to the piece, but also this is very much a blue centric canvas. And so the blue kind of just gives it a little bit more grounding and centricity. Go ahead, lay your texture, and this is going to be a lesson in how to create small leaves and big leaves and some medium leaves. So the first thing I'm doing, this one's going to be a small leaf, and you can see that I'm only loading the palette halfway. And then I'm going to look to see where I can fit this smaller petal or leaf. The great thing about petals and leaves is that it's the exact same motion as creating both of them. So in this case, I'm going to put it to the top, press down, pull back, and you have your first leaf. I'm going to go in with the smaller ones first. That way I can clean up some of the negative space that I know will just be filled with a smaller petal. And then I can work on the bigger spaces later. Now you'll notice that some of these these leaves are pressed up against the petals. This is totally an aesthetic thing, so decide how you want it to be, whether you want to create some space between your petals and your leaves or whether you want them nice and smushed together. I like them smushed every now and then just because it creates that lift, which I think is quite beautiful. Now I'm creating a bigger leaf here and I'm struggling a bit to get the texture onto the palette knife. One is because my palette itself is pretty messy, you can see, and the second is because my palette knife is messy. So next time I should be cleaning this up. Now, this is a much wider, bigger leaf, so it is harder to get all of that texture onto the palette itself. Notice that when I laid this larger one, I pressed down just a bit so that I could create the width that I wanted. Now I'm cleaning up my palette. You noticed before I did go ahead and wipe off my palette knife itself. In this case, I'm creating a smaller leaf, so you can see I only loaded a little bit of texture on here to create that smaller leaf. I'm constantly cleaning up my palette itself so that I can keep a clean palette, which again is the best way for us to create smooth leaves. If you notice, I like to create leaves in clusters of 3 that are also different widths, lengths, and so forth sizes. I have found through trial and error that creating these 3-leaf clusters just creates a purpose. I found that if I wasn't kind of creating these little 3-leaf clusters, that the leaves just look like they were random and everywhere, and it didn't sit right. So I really focus on how I can create a 3-leaf cluster so that I can create that kind of grounding nature to the leaf or to the flower itself. So you can see I created another one here. I like doing different sizes of leaves in this kind of pattern of 3 as well. But go ahead and play around and see what you like, because obviously this is exactly what the artistic impression is. Now here is your complete painting.